It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha! And I'm going to show you guys more Torment Tides of Numenera gameplay because I'm really enjoying this game. It's old school RPG, but there's some modernization in it. The thing I'm liking the most about it is you can actually play through with very little combat. You can talk your way out of situations, you can sneak around, and it actually all works. Just so I preserve my objectivity, there's a lot of reading in this game, and so if that's not your thing, avoid it. I felt like in times a couple of images would have been a lot better than the pages and pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of writing. I wish that these games would start learning show don't tell a bit more. Instead of describing the person, just put up a little portrait. It saves us a lot of reading. And yes, that's more art, but there's a lot of art in this game anyway. Like, there should be concept art no matter what. Shouldn't there? I don't know, maybe I'm wrong here, but more show, less tell would have been good here. And then something that's less of a nitpick and more of a legitimate complaint. When there's a lot of enemies surrounding a character, it can get hard to actually highlight the enemy you want to target. For some odd reason, I can't highlight an enemy by clicking on its character portrait during combat. You have to click on the battlefield. Maybe that's a bug unique to my configuration. I don't know. It's not as funny as the original Torment. The characters are not as fleshed out yet. That's another quibble I have. The party management system is not... You have to remove a character before somebody will join your party instead of overloading your party and then dropping somebody. I wish it was easier to manage the party because I've basically had the same 4 people the whole game because I just can't be bothered to do that shuffle dance. It's working fine. But overall, it's a cool story. It's a cool world. I'll move on. I want to start off talking about the difference between me saying I don't like something and saying something is bad. This is a big thing for me in the Troy Levitt interview, which I think is going really well. I made the comment that I did not like The Witcher 2. Did not like it, couldn't stand it. That's a personal opinion, guys. And arguing me on it is really not going to change my personal opinion. I don't know what it is about this game series, but there's this demand that people like it, or people never leave you alone. And if anything, that's made me like the game less. I think it's fair for me to point out from a technical perspective when I feel like choice is being limited unnaturally. But at no point did I say it was a bad game. I said I personally didn't like it, but I loved the third game. What I also found interesting was that people focused on my lead up in that second game. They focused strictly on trying to twist my arm into saying the second game was great, instead of taking the point of consensus when I said 3 is astoundingly good. And what I don't understand is why we can't just, agree on 3. Why we can't just say, okay, we all agree that The Witcher 3 is an amazing achievement. And this drives me crazy as a game analyst. When people start talking about games, they start talking about characters and story like it's a conventional narrative. And games are so much more complex. They are so much more challenging. Part of my issue, and this may be a personal taste thing, this may be an actual design issue, I was distracted by that entire second subplot that was just cut off from me. For people who don't know, The Witcher 2 has a really unique narrative structure in that there's a, I think, relatively arbitrary choice you make early in the game about whether to side with Yorvith, the Scoia'tael elf, or or Vernon Roach, who's and I always get this wrong because I confuse the Blue Suns and the Blue Stripes. I believe the Blue Stripes is Vernon Roach's command unit. The Blue Suns are from Mass Effect. If I'm wrong, apologies. But you have to pick, and you don't really know either of them terribly well. Then the game branches out into two completely different stories with completely different characters, and people have completely different experiences based on that one arbitrary choice. And it's an experiment. I recognize that, I reward risk. It was worth attempting, but to me, I was constantly distracted from feeling unnaturally locked off from the world. And just to confirm that this isn't necessarily a woman thing, it's a choice thing. I also had an issue with the ending of Fallout 3, where I had a rad resistant super mutant in my party who for some odd reason wouldn't go into the irradiated room, and so the character has to die. It's locking off a bit of player choice for no good reason. Now, I think the reason in The Witcher 2 is that they didn't want to fully animate the Vess character, so they came up with this, paper over, this Band-Aid solution so they wouldn't have to do it. But in a game where they developed two different complete branches and did all those resources and all that extra stuff, if you're going to not conserve resources that way, expect to get called on that when you skimp in other areas. I mean, one of the things that makes The Witcher such an amazing franchise is they have an economic model that other studios just cannot replicate. The way they stretch a buck is incredible. I don't know if it's sustainable. Apparently CDPR has a pretty high burnout rate, but they are able to do so much with the same budget that other companies can't even accomplish. And I admit I'm a little bit concerned about expectations based on that. And that's just because one of my things is working conditions for game developers. I think that there's some unhealthy elements of the industry that need to be corrected for everybody. I think there's a little bit too much disposable employee syndrome. Things that people play for fun should not be killing people. But, these are all, you can go back and forth. You can discuss this stuff. That's part of the fun, is sharing your experiences. But because sharing experiences with other RPG players, what choice did you make? What ending did you get? Because that's part of the enjoyment, you really gotta be careful attacking someone for having a different opinion than you. The big one for me is Sarah in Dragon Age. I cannot stand that character, and other people love her. But I'm not gonna go after a person and go, what's wrong with you for liking Sarah? Like, seriously, I'm not going to shame someone for having a different reaction. Part of the challenge, part of the ongoing evolution of game design is offering choice in a way that is appealing instead of off-putting. When you're kicked out of a game for any reason, that's not a good thing. It disrupts immersion, and immersion is a huge part of games. The abilities to suspend disbelief when you're in that world. And for me, artificial barriers always kick me out. If you're putting your player into a position where they have to make a snap decision, that has to be done quite consciously. The frustration and the lack of control that the player feels has to be deliberate and has to be framed meaningfully, because otherwise it's not satisfying. And games aren't life. Games are meant to be fun. I think is a little bit derivative, because what does fun mean? Horror movies are fun for people. Roller coasters are fun for people. So sometimes discomfort is a part of fun. But again, subjective. But when you get into a situation For instance, it hit me in Dragon Age Inquisition, because the minute any character starts going, oh, redheads, I go, oh, come on. For reasons I'll get to when I deal with another issue that came up in this week. But there's a thing with the Iron Bull in Dragon Age Inquisition. He really sexually objectifies redheads. Don't roll your eyes. He actually is. Bull is a man slut, okay, for lack of a better term. They label him pansexual, but what he actually is a sexual glutton. And that's fine, but there's a scene in the game where he's talking about these threesomes with or possibly more than 3, with the redheaded elf kitchen help, right? And some of the tensions in the game are that the Kunari are a colonizing and occupying force in the world. And so I went, sure, Bull, you're a liar. That they actually establish in the game that the character is a liar. Sure, it was consensual. I'm gonna go check this out. So I go into the kitchen to try to find the staff, and there's no staff. They didn't populate the kitchen. So I really struggled with the idea that a party member, my big, tank enforcer, my two-handed weapon, high hit point character, might be a bit of a rapist. And in an RPG where you're supposed to be role-playing, that's an omission. And especially in a BioWare game, because they beat people over the head with that social justice stuff as a company. That is a mistake. And it could be because of resources. It could be something that they intended to do and didn't. I don't know. And this is not at all what I intended to talk about when I sat down to record this, but that's the joy of Feedback Friday. It goes on tangents. But that thing I talked about, the redheads thing, this ties into something else that was a very interesting point of discussion. And this whole thing, I said, I personally do not find being told I'm hot terribly flattering. And it's not that I'm offended. It's just not as compelling a compliment to me as other things like, this really made me think. This really made me think is the highest compliment someone can pay me as far as I'm concerned. And, this was really interesting. Things like that. I'm far more interested in that because that ties into the intent of my work. And, this back and forth happened in comments that was really quite interesting to me. Where they said hot to me means intelligent and all that stuff, and people agreed, but then they said, but it usually has a physical connotation, and it was a really good discussion, and yes, bless, if more people associated intelligent with hot, I don't think we would have this issue, because then a comment, the Witcher thing again, when I said to Troy during the interview, and I said flat out that this sure baby, I'll treat you as an equal thing in The Witcher hit me personally hard because it aggravates my personal insecurity. I flat out said that. My personal insecurity that men see me differently in a bad way when they find me attractive, when they see me sexual. And somebody actually commented, yeah, that's just human nature. We can't do anything about it. And let me tell you, that made me a little bit depressed. Because I know that people feel that way. And the issue is not whether they should. The issue is when I'm developing any sort of project or working with anybody or trying to get anything done, and I get that guy thinks I'm hot thing. I don't know what guy I'm dealing with. Now, women thinking I'm hot is a completely different issue. Female competitiveness, everything like that, that is a thing. But we're not dealing with this thing right now. Let's stay on this particular topic. I don't know whether this guy I am working with, or worse, working for, is the type of guy who includes intellect in your hot, competence in your hot, or the type of guy who's like, you're hot, I can't see you as anything but fuckable. And if I can't fuck you, well, then you're of no use to me. And there are people who believe that there's just a switch that flips in men's brains, and they shouldn't be held accountable for it. That's just biology, right? Boys will be boys. But what happens is that means I'm, pardon the pun, screwed. In that instance, I will not get ahead, pardon the pun, unless I give head. And that's where the casting couch comes from. That's where some of these, issues in media come from, is because we've normalized that, well, of course, the primary thing I want to do is fuck you, has become normalized in the entertainment industry. There's women who do sleep their way to the middle, and then there's women who don't even get to the middle. And the problem with that is it is sleeping their way to the middle, because then people get plagued by rumors of, well, she slept her way into the job. And the truth is, she did. But there was no other way of getting into that job. And I'm absolutely not saying this happens everywhere. I'm saying it happens enough places that you never know what the situation actually is. And I have wasted so much time with too many people, and then realize this guy's just trying to get into my pants. He's really not interested in actually helping my career. And it's a huge waste of time. And what do? You have to extract yourself. And the problem is then if the guy feels rejected, it's bitch, and they get really nasty. And I'm not saying women don't get nasty, but like I said, specific thing. And so that's the concern there. And it would be easy to just blame the women who do practice the casting couch. But like I said, I sympathize with those women, because if you're not doing that, you're not getting in at all. And when you're developing your career, sometimes the middle is enough, right? At least you're working. At least you're there. It's unfortunate that too many women in entertainment have to get to the table through the bedroom. Someone who will not be named right now talked about it on the male side, that there's a lot of these parties that young men are being abused. And it's the same thing. It's people in power using that power for their own short-term gratification. And no one talks because these people are protected. And it's a real thing. Now, unfortunately, there's an aggression in entertainment media that is, correlated with these abusive sexual practices. Then this is what I enjoy about gaming, is there's a lot more of the nice guys. The nice guys is the wrong word, but the guys who actually do incorporate competent and go-getting and ambitious and intelligent into hot. And I think that is because of characters like Lara Croft and the whole fighting fuck toy trope, right? That is so bemoaned by mainstream feminists, but I think actually teaches guys that no, you can look at her, but you still have to respect her, because she'll kick your fucking ass. But that's a discussion for another time. I want to briefly touch on, as briefly as I can, this is opening up a real can of worms, the idea of theory versus tactics, because it came up and I actually forgot to make a comment in the Beyonce Emma Watson video, and other people kind of made it for me. The comment about, feminism not being a stick to beat other women with. Emma Watson said that, not me. I'm trying to figure out how to put this, because this is a dicey situation, and I may just leave this for another time, because it's huge, right? This is a huge topic. I guess my intent here is to acknowledge the point that yes, the people that said feminism is sometimes, well, they didn't say sometimes, but feminism is a stick that women use to beat other women. That's true. Sometimes it is. And this is the unique challenge when dealing with women's issues. It's because of the way affirmative action campaigns were developed, women were treated like a minority when women are in fact 50% of the population. The problem with looking at women is that women is such a big group that it defies the sorting hat of identity politics, right? When you have a group like transgendered African American lesbians, that is a small, specific enough group that you're going to get some commonality. Whereas women is so huge that you can put 3 women in a room and they will have nothing in common. And I think that gaming has a real potential not to lecture us on these issues, but to allow us to explore what it feels like to be in gender atypical roles and what it feels like to have our assumptions challenged without telling us what we should think. I think it's much more powerful to allow people to explore these issues at their own pace and actually see what it's like. Instead of just, you should be this, and there's certain things you can say and there's certain things you can't say. And that gets into the difference between damn it, I'm gonna save this for another time. Maybe this is gonna be Momo Monday this week, but there's a real power in games to deal with this stuff in an interactive way, and the pendulum is swung towards using games to clobber people with ideologies or to clobber people with cynicism. Games are not, what is the author saying? What is the designer saying? It's, what is the dialogue between the player and the developer through the game? Video games need to have enough damn pride to stand on their own and say, we are good because we're games, not because we're like movies, not because we're cinematic, because we're video game-atic, right? We are our own thing, and we are kicking ass, and we are awesome, and we are powerful, and we are serious, and we are fun, and we are frivolous, and we are all these things at the same time, and that's what makes us awesome. So now I got to come up with a question for you guys. Most people aren't listening, but for those of you who are, I feel like I deserve, the question this week is that what makes you pay for this sort of content? You know, and don't feel bad if you just can't afford it. I totally understand that. What makes people take the leap between just consuming something and taking it for free and feeling that it's worth buying and buying at full price and all that stuff? The reason I'm asking is because I've got to start doing another Patreon push, because people have had to cut the amount of their contribution, as I have more patrons than I did, but each one's paying less. So I ended up making less money last month. And so I have to keep an eye on that, and I have to go out and get new clients, for lack of a better term. You know, I have to hustle. But I'm curious, what makes you feel like you need to pay for, not need, what makes you want to pay for content? That's an important distinction. Because I don't want to have to force people into paying for content. I want it to be something that's a voluntary basis. And maybe that's naive. But, you know, what I don't want to have to do is deliberately being offensive or controversial. I don't like that content myself. I don't like the impact it has on the discourse. So looking forward to your responses. Thanks so much. Thanks for sitting through this lengthy video, and have a great weekend. See you on Monday.